Good morning. Last week after the service, I went up to Tom and Missy and said that he was going to be a tough act to follow. I mean, come on, he's the slide guy, you know? I don't have any slides today, but I have some props. How many of you know what pickleball is? How many of you have played pickleball? Oh, all right. Well, here's the paddle, and here's the ball. Looks like a wiffle ball. It's hard. About the end of January, my husband and I started playing pickleball at the Groveport Recreation Center. And if most of you know what tennis is, it's kind of like tennis, and you have a court and a net. And I'm not very good. My husband's pretty good, but I'm getting there, but I'm not very good. But if you've ever been to the Groveport Rec Center, they have 2 full basketball courts, and they can put 3 pickleball courts on each side. And there is a track that you can walk around that goes above, and you can look down and see the pickleball courts or the basketball or whatever's going on. Well, when we play pickleball, the good people are usually on one side, and the not so good people are on the other side. Well, you can guess I'm on the not so good side. But we have a good time. We're laughing, and those guys over there, they are serious. So one day I came in, and not enough people had come yet to go over to the dark side, I call it. And so the good people were sitting on this side. And I was talking to this one lady, telling her I had seen her play the other day, and you know, she's really good. She's always on the dark side. Well, the way you pair up is when you come in, you set your paddle down along the wall, and then, you know, the first 4 paddles go out to this court and then the next, and you kind of keep rotating around. Well, it came time for my paddle to be drawn, and the lady I was talking to and another lady and a guy were drawn. The 2 ladies that were really good, that should have been over on the dark side, were playing against this guy and me. And he's good. I don't know what in the world I was doing with him, but anyway. So it started out, and the one court always serves first, always. And if once you lose your serve, it goes to the other side, and then they both each have a turn and comes back. Well, my partner, Daryl, served first, and we lost the serve. I have no clue what happened, but we lost it. The other 2 ladies went to their side. Now, you play to 11 unless you have to win by 2, so it could be 10 to 12 or something like that, but you play to 11. And if the other team doesn't score any points, it's called getting pickled. Well, I've been pickled before, but never this bad. My partner served, lost his serve. The other 2 ladies, they just kept serving. 1 to nothing, 2 to nothing, 3 to nothing. Next thing I know, the game is over. I didn't even get to serve. It didn't even come back to me. I've never had that happen. At least I get the serve, you know, lose it. Well, the tradition is you meet at the net and tap paddles and say, good game, and then the losers go off and the winners stay on for the next 2 people. So as I'm walking to the net, I'm thinking, what am I going to say? This is not a good game. I'm going to try to make light of this, make a joke of it. So I walk up to the net. Those ladies are standing there, and I said, ladies, I just want you to know, if I had gotten to serve, it would have been a totally different game. They didn't crack a smile. They just turned around and walked off. My partner looked at me like, whoa. I said, I was just trying to be funny, you know. So the next time I went to play, I was up on the track walking around, warming up, and I'm looking down over there and I'm thinking, those wolves are down there. I am not going down yet. So I'm waiting till my lambs come in, So I just kept walking, and finally enough people came that they went to the other side. So I go down, and my partner, Daryl, was sitting there. And I said, Daryl, I didn't want to come down because those wolves were down here. And I said, I'll wait for my lambs to show up. And he looked at me, and he goes, you know what? Sometimes you got to play with the wolves to get better. I said, well, that might be true, but I didn't want to be eaten alive by those wolves. Well, today's theme is Reach Out with Faith. And we will be talking about the one who mixed with the wolves, who reached out to the wolves, and so many others, not because he needed to be better, like I did, but because he was already perfect. But he wanted to make the wolves better, to make the wolves more like lambs, more loving, kind, generous, patient, humble, more like Jesus. The scripture today, as Mark said, is taken from Matthew 9 to 13, and 18 to 26. I'm going to read those to you. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who needs a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." While he was saying this, a ruler came and knelt before him and said, "My daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her, and she will live." Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. Just then a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, "If only I touch his cloak, I will be healed." Jesus turned and saw her. "Take heart, daughter," he said, "your faith has healed you." And the woman was healed from that moment. When Jesus entered the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the noisy crowd, he said, "Go away, the girl is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took the girl by the hand, and she got up. News of this spread through all that region. Matthew, as we saw in the video, was a tax collector working for the Romans. The people hated him because he charged extra for personal profit, enriching himself at the expense of his fellow citizens. The tax collectors were held in great contempt, were barred from the synagogue, and were considered the moral equivalent of robbers and murderers. Because of this, Jesus' call to Matthew is shocking and demonstrates that God loves and wants to redeem every person. What is also shocking is the fact that Matthew left his lucrative job, knowing he could never regain it, cut himself off from his old network of friends, and followed Jesus. It was a remarkable act of faith. I think Matthew heard the voice of truth. Then Jesus went on to eat dinner at Matthew's home. In a spirit of joy, Matthew invites all of his friends to join in a great feast. Of course, the Pharisees see this, and they ask the disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And Jesus answers, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick." Jesus came to heal the sick, not just physically, but spiritually, mentally, emotionally, socially, the lonesome, the outcast, the brokenhearted, the confused, the misguided, all who thirst for the voice of truth. While Jesus was talking to them, a wealthy leader came to him and said his daughter had just died. He believed that if Jesus would just lay his hand on her, she would live. As Jesus was on his way to the leader's home, he was interrupted by another person in need. A woman who had been bleeding for 12 years came up behind Jesus and touched his cloak. She believed that such contact would make her well. Jesus turned and saw her and said, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has healed you." The woman had great faith and took a huge chance in touching Jesus' cloak. In those days, she could have been severely punished for that small act. Jesus then travels on to the home of the wealthy leader. He told the professional mourners to go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping. In God's reign, death does not destroy the person. It is temporary, like sleeping. To show this truth, Jesus went inside, took the girl by her hand, and she got up. Both of the women were alienated from society, one by sickness and death, the other by uncontrolled bleeding. Both were ritually unclean. Jesus returned them to full relationship and to life and health. He took precious time on his way to the wealthy home to pause and provide ministry to the poor woman. Prestige and wealth had no greater claim on his ministry than poverty and despair. His actions proclaim God's inclusive reign, affirming the worth of poor and rich alike. The wealthy leader, the poor woman, and the despised tax collector all reached out with faith. As the old saying goes, they put all their eggs in the same basket, and that basket was Jesus. As I began to think about today's theme, I remembered that we did a series several years ago based on the book by John Ortberg called "If You Want to Walk on Water, You've Got to Get Out of the Boat." I see Kathy smiling. She led that series. In fact, we called it the Get Out of the Boat series. I want to share some of that message because it goes so well with today's theme, reach out with faith. You may have noticed that I've used the phrase, the voice of truth, several times already this morning. So before I continue, Cameron is going to play the beginning of the Casting Crowns song, The Voice of Truth. Can you imagine yourself in that same scene? The disciples were in a fishing boat in the middle of a lake, in the middle of the night, in the middle of a storm. Imagine the thunder crashing, the lightning flashing, and the waves rising higher and higher. Some of the disciples were professional fishermen, and yet it was taking everything they had just to keep that boat upright. Sometimes reaching out with faith is just like Peter getting out of the boat. What is it that keeps us from reaching out or getting out of the boat? Fear. When we don't step out in faith, we are belittling God. We are saying we don't believe He's big enough to catch us when we fall. The boat represents our comfort zone. So let me ask you a very important question. What is your boat? Ortberg puts it this way. I will read what he says about it. Your boat is whatever represents safety and security to you apart from God Himself. Your boat is whatever you are tempted to put your trust in, especially when life gets a little stormy. Your boat is whatever keeps you comfortable, so comfortable that you don't want to give it up, even if it's keeping you from joining Jesus on the waves. Your boat is whatever pulls you away from the high adventure of extreme discipleship. Want to know what your boat is? Your fear will tell you. Just ask yourself this: what is it that most produces fear in me, especially when I think of leaving it behind and stepping out in faith? When I was little and growing up in southern Ohio, and we would go swimming, it was usually in the creek somewhere. We always had our favorite swimming hole, we'd say. We're going to the swimming hole. My dad was a very proficient swimmer. In fact, if those of you from southern Ohio know what Lake White is, it's a pretty good-sized lake. I was told when he was in high school, he swam across Lake White on a dare. So I wouldn't advise that. But when it came time that he thought it was time for me to learn how to swim, we went to the swimming hole. And this one particular place had a big tree with a root sticking out over it. I'm sure my mom was shaking her head, having a heart attack about this time, because my dad's idea of teaching me to swim was putting me on his shoulders and diving off of that root into the swimming hole. I have no clue what happened after that. Obviously, I didn't drown, but I did learn how to swim. Maybe not that day, but I learned how to swim. But that was my first experience of, hey, was I afraid? Yeah, definitely. But he was my dad. I trusted that he would protect me. It's the same with God. Of course we're afraid to attempt something new. What if we fail? What will others think of us? Do you think Peter failed? Actually, the other disciples failed. They didn't even try to get out of the boat. You can't walk on water if you don't get out of the boat. You may fall, you may sink, you may even go completely under the waves, but Jesus is always there holding out His hand to you. Do you trust Him? Peter was fine until he took his eyes off of Jesus. He began to notice the waves, the wind, the thunder, and the lightning. Had he kept his eyes on Jesus, he may have walked the whole way to Him. Usually in our lives, when we begin to sink, it's when we've taken our eyes off of Jesus. Ortberg opens his book with a story about a hot air balloon ride that I want to read to you. Some years ago, my wife arranged for us to ride in a hot air balloon as a birthday gift. We went to the field where the balloons ascended and got into a little basket with another couple. We introduced ourselves and swapped vocational information. Then our pilot began the ascent. The day had just dawned, clear, crisp, cloudless. We could see the entire valley from craggy canyons to the Pacific Ocean. It was scenic, inspiring, and majestic. But I also experienced one emotion I had not anticipated. You want to guess? Fear. I had always thought those baskets went about chest high, but this one only came up to our knees. One good lurch would be enough to throw someone over the side. So I held on with grim determination and white knuckles. I looked over at my wife, who does not care for heights at all, and relaxed a bit, knowing there was someone in the basket more tense than I was. About this time, I decided I'd like to get to know the kid who was flying the balloon. I realized that I could try to psych myself up into believing everything would be fine, but the truth was we had placed our lives and destinies in the hands of the pilot. Everything depended on his character and competence. I asked him what he did for a living and how he got started flying hot air balloons. I was hoping for his former job to be one full of responsibilities. A neurosurgeon, perhaps? An astronaut who missed going up in space? I knew we were in trouble when his response to me began, "Dude, it's like this." He didn't even have a job. He mostly surfed. He said the reason he started flying hot air balloons was that he had been driving around in his pickup when he'd had too much to drink, crashed the truck, and badly injured his brother. His brother still couldn't get around too well, so watching hot air balloons gave him something to do. "By the way," he added, "if things get a little choppy on the way down, don't be surprised. I've never flown this particular balloon before, and I'm not sure how it's going to handle on the descent." My wife looked over at me and said, "Do you mean to tell me we are 1,000 feet up in the air with an unemployed surfer who started flying hot air balloons because he got drunk, crashed a pickup, injured his brother, and has never been in this one before and doesn't know how to bring it down?" Then the wife of the other couple looked at me and spoke, the only words either of them were to utter during the entire trip. "You're a pastor. Do something religious." My story, like every human story, is at least in part the struggle between faith and fear. I ask you again, what is your boat? What is holding you back from walking on the water with Jesus? Ortberg says of the disciples, only Peter knew the glory of walking on the water. He alone knew what it was to attempt to do what he was not capable of doing on his own, and then feeling the euphoria of being empowered by God to actually do it. Only Peter knew the glory of being lifted up by Jesus in a moment of desperate need. He had a shared moment, a shared connection, a shared trust in Jesus that none of the others had. They couldn't, because they didn't even get out of the boat. The worst failure is not to sink in the waves. The worst failure is to never get out of the boat. So where are you right now? Are you comfortable sitting in your boat, maybe in a padded deck chair, sipping an iced tea? Are you at the edge, looking over the railing, thinking you'd like to join Jesus on the water? Maybe you have one leg in and one leg out. Maybe you are out of the boat, but still clinging to the edge, afraid to let go. Jesus is still looking for people who will get out of the boat. But why risk it? There are many reasons. But the most important one is this: the water is where Jesus is. Jesus is not in the boat. If you want to be with Jesus, you've got to get out of the boat. And if you do get out, two things will happen. The first thing is, when you fail, and you will fail sometimes, Jesus will be there to pick you up. You will not fail alone. And the other thing is, every once in a while, you will walk on the water. Don't let fear hold you back from being all that God meant you to be. Matthew had the faith to leave everything behind and follow Jesus. The poor woman risked severe punishment by reaching out to touch Jesus and therefore be healed. The rich ruler put aside his pride and risked ridicule by asking for the help of Jesus. Peter overcame his fear and put all of his faith in the one who will always be there for us. These people reached out with faith, got out of their boats, and listened to the voice of truth, the voice of Jesus. Not only do we need to reach out with faith, but Jesus reaches out to us with faith. Faith that we will follow him wherever he needs us to go. Listen for the voice of truth and reach out with faith.